It has been 70 years since Godzilla first hit the silver screen. And in that time, he has quite literally reshaped the world. From the incarnation of atomic horror to the world's nuclear-powered superhero savior, he's been quite a lot over these last 70 years. And I don't think it's a stretch that he has been the most important fictional character in all of history for that reason. Created in the decade following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Godzilla was the embodiment of the nuclear anxiety felt by those who felt the wrath of such terrible weapons. He is not just the destroyer, as is often shown, but he is also the victim, those who were left behind. So he is actually two sides of the same coin, the destroyer and the victim, often focusing on one specific point or another. However, he has also been used to convey very differing ideas, with Godzilla Minus One being used as a statement of how war can change a person, or change a creature in this case, and in Shin Godzilla actually being used as a criticism of the failure to clean up with the Fukushima nuclear disaster, to, well, our American version of the character in the MonsterVerse, where we get him suplexing King Ghidorah through skyscrapers. You gotta love to see it. The guy's got range. And if you love Godzilla as much as we do, don't forget to subscribe for more and comment your thoughts below. We've got a whole lot to cover today. However, I don't think it's quite a stretch to say that without Godzilla, we may not have the world we live in today. Because though he has reshaped fiction and reshaped the way that movies are made, without him there may not be a world we live in today at all. That is because by putting a face to the horror of nuclear Armageddon, Godzilla helped people come to grips with the reality of the power that had been unleashed by nuclear weapons. After all, an abstract concept is very hard for us to come to terms with, but if you can put a face on it, if you can, for lack of a better term, humanize that power, humanize that terror, give us something to relate it to, we can understand it. Something to convey, this is the destructive power we have unleashed to people, not just in Japan, but to all around the world. After all, Godzilla was a way of showing and getting out that nuclear anxiety that the Japanese felt and were not really able to talk about at the time by portraying it as a giant mutant dinosaur creature, which was picked up and shown around the world. By helping to contribute to the fear of nuclear war, Godzilla may have helped to avert it entirely, even if in some small capacity. And for that, thank you, Godzilla. However, we also have much to thank Godzilla for in regards to just movies and media as a whole. Many prominent directors and even other creators would simply not be here if it weren't for Godzilla. Steven Spielberg has said that the original Godzilla is one of the best monster movies, and was a very large inspiration for many of his movies, like Jaws and especially Jurassic Park. Which, Jurassic Park itself, as well as Jaws, are movies that if you have seen really any movie since those movies have released, you can sometimes pick up on elements, especially in horror and monster movies, that are drawn from those movies especially. In almost a bit of a fun things coming full circle, there's elements of Godzilla Minus One, at least at the start, which are evocative of Jurassic Park. But even beyond that, to Guillermo del Toro, Quentin Tarantino, Akira Kurosawa, and even the greats such as John Carpenter and Tim Burton, James Gunn as well. And even beyond movies, we have people like Dave Filoni, who is best known for directing many episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and really the entirety of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Which really should be no surprise for anyone who has seen Star Wars: The Clone Wars. There is literally a 2-part episode saga called The Zillo Beast and The Zillo Beast Strikes Back, where one of the clone troopers' helmets is painted to look like Godzilla's face and eyes. You have one of the tactical droids having the Oxygen Destroyer on its chest, and the titular monster itself, the Zillo Beast, ends up attacking and rampaging in Coruscant much like a classic kaiju film. However, bringing things back into Japan, without Godzilla, we wouldn't have Kurama. Yes, Even Naruto has been touched by the Godzilla franchise. Masashi Kishimoto has stated that the inspiration for the tailed beasts came from classic kaiju, specifically Godzilla, but including Mothra, Rodan, Ghidorah, and those last three wouldn't have existed without Godzilla. As well as even things like the summoning jutsu that Kishimoto has said was inspired by these kaiju battles. Without him, we would have a very different landscape of just pop culture stories, and that is simply only a few of them. On a much more practical level, in terms of the way movies are actually made, suitimation, or rather the art of using suits to portray characters, and specifically monsters, was not first created by Godzilla. Creature from the Black Lagoon actually did it about half a year before Godzilla, but these two things were developed largely independently from one another. And thanks to Godzilla, and specifically Eiji Tsuburaya, set the standard for and greatly advanced the technology of suitimation, perfecting it. Especially during a time where it was largely viewed as obsolete by specifically Hollywood, since the idea of CGI had largely taken root. However, in Japan, they merged the idea of computer-generated and practical effects into a singular system. Something that allowed, eventually, movies like Alien and Predator, things which do use suited alien monsters, to be portrayed in the capacity that they were. Two movies that really are absolute gold standards for American movies, especially horror. Had Godzilla not been made, and again, suitimation being pioneered as much as it had been, these movies would never have had the same degree of effects which still hold up to today. They also help to refine the art of puppeteering, something which in the original Aliens, the Queen Alien was supposed to have been stop motion. It was believed to be impossible or just simply not worth doing practically. However, James Cameron insisting that it be done live with a giant puppet requiring no less than 16 people to operate was able to be done because of the methods that had been made and refined over the decades which tokusatsu kaiju films. Showing that, yes, these ideas can work, especially taken to even larger scales. The Godzilla movies, both the Japanese and the American, for varying levels of quality, I think all of them are, at the very least, good for their own reasons. After all, movies like the Monsterverse are meant to entertain us with spectacular action. Godzilla suplexing King Ghidorah through skyscrapers, King Kong grabbing a frickin' glowing atomic Godzilla spike axe and bashing Mechagodzilla over the head with it. It's great. It's some absolutely glorious, spectacular nonsense fun. At the same time, we get deeper stories, things like Godzilla Minus One, which are driven by the characters, where you are not meant to rejoice when Godzilla is attacking things, but rather, you're meant to be horrified. You're meant to be in fear and dread this creature's appearance. The range that Godzilla has as a character is something few, if any other, characters have ever been able to match. And Godzilla, at least personally, has affected me in a lot of different ways. Growing up, it was actually my favorite thing, and because of Godzilla, I was actually driven to lose 50 pounds, something that I have mentioned in the past, but back when Godzilla 2014 first came out, I specifically wanted to get a Godzilla shirt to wear to the premiere when I went to go see it. That shirt, over the next couple of years, no longer fit me because I gained a lot of weight. And then, when Godzilla vs. King Kong happened, or rather Godzilla vs. Kong happened, I put the shirt on and it didn't fit. That did hurt me a lot inside because I loved that shirt, and that is what finally gave me the little bit of a kick in the pants to start losing weight. 50 pounds later, that shirt still fits, even a decade later. It takes a lot for a character to be able to affect people like that. From an icon of nuclear oblivion to a source of inspiration. To the bringer of joy as a former bringer of terror. As a character, Godzilla has been really everything. From a victim of nuclear annihilation to a harbinger of atomic destruction himself, he's been a good guy, he's been a bad guy, he's been a father, he's been even a zombie. However, he is so much more than that. The range of his movies extends from horror to commentary on nuclear war, again, especially showing the devastation and consequences of nuclear weapons being used. They've been silly, they've been serious. Things like the MonsterVerse's absolutely spectacular action to movies covering some very complex themes even beyond the standard atomic destruction. For as silly as the Showa era is often regarded, it in reality wasn't. It oftentimes did have some political commentary on things that were going on in the day. Many movies did deal with the atomic consequences that spawned the original Godzilla, but other things commented on ideas such as alien invasions being a stand-in for colonization. All Monsters Attack, despite many of its sillier and out there elements, namely being that it's the only Godzilla movie where Godzilla is actually not real, everything is in the minds of a youngling, is actually a commentary on the Japanese economy at the time. A time where latchkey younglings would come home and both of their parents were away at work because both their mother and father needed to work just to support them. This is paralleled by where younglings needed to deal with their own bullies. This is paralleled by the monster Gabra, which is a stand-in for this idea of the bully, and Minilla being the stand-in for the younglings. However, other movies, even beyond the era of Showa movies, dealt with other themes. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 is about the battle between natural life versus artificial life, and an adopted father taking care of a being that is not their own, however, doing so because it is the right thing to do. In fact, the main conflict between Godzilla and Rodan in this movie is of a familial conflict. Rodan wants to protect Junior because it views Junior as his essentially half-brother, as they were both nestmates, whereas Godzilla views Junior as an adopted son because both of them are the same species. The conflict comes over because both of them wish to protect Junior. In the end, Rodan sacrifices himself to revive and save Godzilla because he realizes only Godzilla can protect Junior. And this is what allows Godzilla to destroy his mechanical doppelganger, with Heisei-era Godzilla going on to be an adoptive father and, on several occasions, save Junior from other monsters, Space Godzilla and Destroya. In fact, the rage and despair we see on Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Destroya is brought on because Destroya ends Junior, as well as some themes dealing with the horrors of genetic modification and genetic engineering. A frequent thing brought up is the anti-nuclear energy bacteria, something created from Godzilla's own DNA to destroy him from the inside out. Biollante spawned from Godzilla's own cells being merged with that of a plant. The Dorats being merged into a singular monster, King Ghidorah, in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, and the unintended consequences of the deployment of the Oxygen Destroyer coming full circle, bringing Godzilla against a darkest version of himself in Destroya. One of the reasons why Destroya works so well is he is a dark, twisted, and corrupted mirror of the worst possible version of Godzilla. Both Godzilla and Destroya were spawned by super weapons used to stop some threat. However, Destroya was not mutated by radiation, but rather the chemical properties of the Oxygen Destroyer. While they do have the same origin, Godzilla is at the very least a sympathetic character, mutated and scarred by the atomic weapons. Destroya is a mindless, sadistic, well, not mindless, but a single-minded, sadistic, omnicidal monster that wishes nothing more than the complete annihilation of all life. Godzilla has shown many redeeming qualities even in the original series and even in the original movie, where, once more, he is a victim, he is lashing out in confused anger, whereas in the Heisei and Showa era films, he is shown to not quite forgive humanity, but able to move past the past horrors that had happened and essentially let bygones be bygones. In fact, even partnering up with humanity in both of these series against greater threats. With GMK, a movie set in the Millennium Era and one of the first Godzilla movies I ever saw, actually showing that Godzilla is more than just atomic destruction. He is an embodiment of Japan's horrors come back to haunt them in the modern day. This Godzilla being a creation or a possession, we don't actually really know, of all the souls killed by Japan during the Second World War. another Millennium Era movie, the Kiryu Saga, or rather two movies, Kiryu Saga, shows a somewhat morally murky decision made by humanity to dredge up the skeleton of the original Godzilla, encase it in a suit of armor to face down the new Godzilla. However, humanity grave-robbing Godzilla brought the creature back. We pulled the creature back from the afterlife and forced it to fight another member of its own kind. In Tokyo SOS, Mothra's fairies specifically present this conflict to us, and it brings up the idea that, is it really the right thing to do? Yes, humanity is defending itself from Godzilla, but is that truly the correct way to do things? To Shin Godzilla, I brought it up a little bit before, but Shin Godzilla was not prompted by atomic weapons or really war as a whole, unlike the original Godzilla, which was prompted and created to specifically embody the American nuclear threat. Rodan was actually created to embody the Soviet nuclear threat. But in Shin Godzilla, it was created in response to the Fukushima nuclear disaster and the rather poor, ineffective, and delayed effort by the Japanese government to clean it up. It was specifically meant to be long, drawn out, and bureaucratic in many of those parts of the movies. That's why there's so many meetings, because it is a criticism of that inefficiency, the inability to act quickly and decisively to save lives. So while Godzilla's core as being a nuclear embodiment is still there in Shin, the origin of it is entirely different. I think that it actually works a lot better, since in that movie, Shin is actually created by American nuclear dumping in the Tokyo Bay rather than the Castle Bravo tests. Showing that, in the end, Godzilla is not quite a hollow shell, but he is an idea. He is a concept that can be molded and shaped by directors and writers into various final forms, and while that final form will oftentimes look somewhat similar, even looking at Monster vs. Godzilla, despite as many differences to the classical traditional Godzilla look, we can still tell that these are the same creature. These are both Godzilla. Their origins may vary, their personalities may vary, but in the end, Godzilla is still Godzilla. And truly, I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't believe there is a singular best version of Godzilla. I love movies like -1 just as much as I love movies like Godzilla Kong the New Empire. They both have their flaws. They both have their good points. And that's what makes them great. There is no such thing as perfection. It is specifically the imperfections that make something worth experiencing. So, thank you, Godzilla, and happy birthday. You've given more to all of us than we can ever say. Have a wonderful day. If you guys haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe for more. Leave your thoughts below on the video, and I will see you next time. Long live the Kaiju King. And hopefully to many more than 70 years onwards.